This is Rummy's Corner. It finally happened. It had been 4 years since they last met, and 5 years since they first squared off. The highly anticipated third fight between Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin. This one was for Canelo's undisputed super middleweight world championship. After an uneventful opening 2 rounds where both guys were getting refamiliarized, the pace began picking up in round 3. Canelo was beginning to outbox a lethargic-looking Triple G, who was unable to establish any real type of rhythm. Canelo had seized command in the third, and he was putting in some good work during the next several rounds where a trend was taking shape. Canelo was making great use of his faster hands, his better footwork, his quicker reflexes, and his superior ability to execute whenever he got a favorable angle to attack an opening. Golovkin was looking mighty unsure of himself throughout much of the action, and he appeared content to box Canelo at his own pace where he was outlanding and outworking Gennady. Canelo continued controlling the action and outboxing Golovkin. But near the end of round 8, Gennady suddenly began showing signs of life. Gennady began jabbing better over the next few rounds, and he was doing a better job of creating a little bit of his trademark forward aggression. Meanwhile, Canelo was looking a little fatigued, and Gennady was now the one who was generally throwing and landing more, even if Canelo was still landing here and there in sneaky style. The 12th and final round saw both boxers fairly evenly matched. This wound up being round number 36 in the rivalry. Things ended not unlike the way they began in terms of being competitive, but things finished with a bit more intensity to close out the show. At the conclusion of 12 rounds of action, Canelo was awarded a unanimous decision. Dave Moretti had it 116 to 112, and Steve Weisfeld and David Sutherland both had it 115 to 113. With the victory, Canelo retained his undisputed super middleweight world championship. After the fight, it was reported that Canelo may be out of action for a full year because of a pre-existing wrist injury. Perhaps this helps explain why he fought at such a measured pace, even by his own standard. And perhaps it also explains why he was not as active over the last few rounds. But at the end of the day, Canelo officially holds 2 victories over Golovkin and a draw. When you have a trilogy fight, the expectation is that you wind up with a decisive winner in the rivalry, but that's not always the case. And here is a perfect example of a boxing trilogy rivalry that doesn't have the most conclusive ending to it. Take, for example, the recent heavyweight trilogy between Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder, where after battling to a somewhat controversial draw in their first bout, Fury beat Wilder in back-to-back fights inside the distance. That is decisive. And that was another trilogy that began with a draw. That first draw between Canelo and Golovkin was a controversial one, where most observers believed Triple G deserved to win. And the thing that really reeked about that verdict was the inexplicable 118 to 110 scorecard from Adelaide Bird, a tally that was in no way, shape, or form reflective of the action that transpired in the ring. Then in the rematch, Canelo was awarded a razor-thin majority decision in a fight that was far more competitive. But even here, there were a lot of people who believed that Golovkin had done enough to win, or at least earn a draw. But that second fight was close and competitive enough that it was going to be somewhat controversial no matter the outcome. Following that fight, Canelo and Golovkin appeared to be boxers headed in opposite directions. Their diverging career paths saw Canelo on the rise, where he would win in a unification bout at 160. He won a major world title at 175, and he became the first undisputed super middleweight world champion during the relatively short history of the super middleweight division. Canelo appeared to be coming into his own and hitting his peak stride. Meanwhile, Golovkin was far less active, but he did win another major world title at 160, and also a unification bout in the lead-in to the third fight, whereas Canelo lost in his attempt to win another title at 175 just before the third fight. And that's pretty much what we got in this third fight. It was a clear win for Canelo, where at times Golovkin looked every bit his age of 40 years old, where he often appeared slow, lethargic, and unsure of himself. Ironically, however, the older warrior finished the fight admirably, whereas the younger superstar seemed to tire and fade a bit down the final stretch. The third fight was almost like a microcosm of the direction both boxers had been headed since last they met. Golovkin clearly is no longer as sharp and destructive as he once was, and Canelo may be closer to his prime form still, but even here, maybe all that jumping around in weight is beginning to catch up with him, because Canelo doesn't look as sharp and fluid as he once did either. Clearly, the trilogy between Canelo and Golovkin isn't on the same level of the most famous trilogies in the history of the sport, like the incredible trilogy between Marco Antonio Barrera and Erik Morales. Technically speaking, the stakes may have been a little higher for Canelo and Golovkin throughout their rivalry in terms of alphabet belts at stake. But the Barrera and Morales trilogy was superior in terms of excitement, intensity, and having a decisive winner in the rivalry. The history books will show that Canelo is technically speaking the winner in this rivalry, and Canelo clearly deserved to win this final matchup, no doubt about it whatsoever. On the other hand, most observers view Golovkin as the rightful winner of the first bout, despite the incompetent, if not corrupt, scorecard from Adelaide Bird. The rematch was something completely different, where the fight was extremely competitive, it reasonably could have gone either way, and by the slimmest of margins, Canelo got the victory. In some ways, there are similarities with Manny Pacquiao and Juan Manuel Marquez, where prior to their fourth and final contest, all of their previous matchups were extremely close and could have gone either way. Marquez technically lost that rivalry, but he put an exclamation point on it with the frighteningly dramatic stoppage win in fight number 4. The difference here, though, is that too much time has passed since their first two bouts with Canelo and Golovkin. So the more valid comparison might be with Sugar Ray Leonard and Roberto Duran. Their first two bouts happened 5 months apart in 1980, and their third fight didn't happen until 1989, when both guys were no longer the same fighter. Same type of thing here, where Canelo and Golovkin were essentially the same guy fighting a year apart, and then finally fighting again 4 years later. In both situations, you had Duran and Golovkin too far removed from their best days in age, north of their best fighting weights, where Duran and Golovkin were always going to have trouble outboxing the younger foe by the time the final fight happened. But they were still experienced enough and durable enough that they lasted the distance without much difficulty. Had Leonard and Duran had a third fight in 1981, it would have undoubtedly been a better fight than what we got in 1989, and the same would have been true if Canelo and Golovkin had their final fight in 2019 instead of 2022. At the end of the day, Canelo and Golovkin have been two of the most talented boxers in the world over the last decade. They are both highly skilled combatants with a great deal of pride and courage, and historically speaking, their trilogy was important in the history of the 160 and 168 pound divisions. But regardless of all these facts, across 36 rounds spanning 5 years, it certainly wasn't one of the more memorable trilogies in terms of drama and intensity when it comes to trilogies whose stakes have been as high as they were here in the situation with Canelo and Gennady. So what did you think of the third fight between Canelo and Triple G? And what did you think of the trilogy as a whole when compared to some of the more famous trilogies during the long, rich history of professional boxing? Please share your thoughts in the comments section. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed and have a wonderful night. This is Rummy's Corner.